Thank you for coming today. The person who should be speaking about this is Derek from New Zealand at the end there on the right, who is the Mr. Commonwealth of our expedition team. And to talk about how I got into it probably goes back to when I was about 1 year old, or rather when I was born in Windsor, outside the castle, obviously. At a time when it was being bombed during the war, which my mother didn't like. So she moved all of us, my sisters and me, out to South Africa for 12 years without consulting us. And I have to say it was a really nice place to get brought up, except that academically it was way behind the UK. Today it's probably the other way around, but that's the way it was. So when we got back, my mother didn't have any money, so she needed to educate all of us and was very happy when she found a place called Winchester College, which took anybody totally free of charge if your family name was Fiennes. This was the bloke that built it 800 years ago had been called Fiennes, and he obviously liked the idea of lots of little Fienneses going there free. And also because in those days there were a very few of us, so it was economically safe for the college. But more recently, we started to breed like rabbits, mostly actors, and it became unsafe for the college. So they changed the rules. After that, you could only get in free if you got the top level of entrance exam. And due to my African background, I got the bottom level, and they would not accept me, to my mother's disappointment. In fact, the only place which would take people with such a low level of intellect was, of course, Eton College. So I went there for about 5 years, but my level was so low that I couldn't even keep up with theirs. And basically, the only thing that I wanted to do was what my dad had done, commanding the Royal Scots Greys during the war when he was killed. And unfortunately, by the time I arrived, you couldn't go to Sandhurst to be a regular officer if you did not pass A-levels. In his day, there weren't any. So I got taken away from Eton because the place is badly designed for getting people A-levels. And I was sent to a famous place in Brighton called Davis's. And basically, if you went there, when you came out the other end, you definitely had your A-levels. And I'm not at all proud of having broken their record. This was, to be honest, not my fault, because it was the height of the mini-skirt era, and concentration was not therefore possible. So I failed the A-levels twice, but obviously in life, as I'm sure everyone here is aware, if you can't get where you want, like Sandhurst, because you haven't got regular commission A-levels, you've got to find an alternate route. And I found a place in Aldershot called Mons Cadet School. And if you went there for 5 months and you could prove to the sergeants that under a situation of great stress, you could dig holes in straight lines, you could become an officer in the British Army. So I did this, and I got sent to Germany for, I spent 5 years in tanks during the Cold War, learning how to retreat from the German border. This got quite tedious. So when I saw a notice asking for officers to apply for the SAS, I put my name down, not because I knew about them. Nobody in those days had ever heard of them. It was before Harold Wilson started to use them for PR purposes. I had obviously heard of Scandinavian airline services, so I got sent to Hereford, which is where you go to get selected for the unit. And I found there were 190 soldiers trying to get in, 30 other officers. All of them were built like sort of brick houses. Most were ex-paras, red berries. None came from a cavalry regiment. They called me a donkey walloper. So I was quite happy when they got eliminated in only 10 days down to only 3 soldiers and 2 officers. And I was very surprised I was still there, probably because they were selecting people from a physical, not intellectual point of view. But unfortunately, on the 11th day, they switched. So I had to try to become alert. And I can remember, if you failed anything, you got thrown out immediately. And what me and the other remaining officer were having to do one particular night was to cross the local river in winter by night with no clothes on for some military reason. So I woke up extremely tired the following morning at about 11 o'clock. You're meant to get up at 6 o'clock. And I panicked because they leave your instructions every day on your bed. And what it was that day was to steal £200,000 from the local bank in Hereford, which they check your method in great detail and assess your character as a result. I had Barclays, the other officer had Lloyd's, and I rushed down, but the bank was already closed, so I could not get in to do a careful burglary plan. This is enough to get you thrown out of the SS. So I went round the back and I banged on the window, and the manager came out. He was a charming bloke, very naive, and I explained I'd come from Germany. I was trying to get into the SAS. I had brought all my family silver with me. This bit was not true. And he said, no, Barclays, we are very secure. He showed me all the electronic burglar devices, so I thanked him. And in those days, it's carbon paper, took the bank raid plan to the colonel just in time, and me and the other bloke had the day off, so we went up to Birmingham, we had a spaghetti dinner, and stupidly, I left my copy of the bank raid plan in the restaurant. And the manager, later in court, basically happened, gave the police the plans. There was full front page of the Times, Westminster inquiries, why SAS officers were stealing from banks. I was up before the colonel, who basically said, any more behavior like this and I would be thrown out of the regiment immediately. Well, for the next year or so in the regiment, doing odd things in different parts of the world, I behaved pretty well. But back here, briefly, unfortunately, I got phoned by an old Etonian friend who, by that time, like most of them, had become a wine salesman in the West Country. And during the course of selling his stuff, he discovered a pub in a village called Castle Combe, which had just been voted Britain's prettiest village by the Americans. And it was being attacked by 20th Century Fox making a film in this beautiful village called Dr. Dolittle, which involved turning this trout stream, thatched cottages, into a dirty great lake for filming with a concrete barrier 20 foot high, ruining the village. And my friend decided to bring this outrage to the general attention by blowing up the entire concrete dam the night before the film started, which was a good PR plan. But the police got to hear about it. They put Alsatian dogs all over the dam. But my friend been at Eton, so he was up to that one. What he did was to rent 8 Alsatian bitches to put them upwind of the dam. But at the last minute, the bitches failed to turn up, so he rang me up to ask if I would stand in. Because he knew I had completed an army explosives course where you learn to blow up as much as you can using as little as possible. And I was quite good at this, so I had a lot left over at the end of every day. And it seemed stupid to give it back to Her Majesty, so I put it in the boot. And 2 months later, the boot was full and sweating, and what better way of getting rid of it than this public-spirited gesture? Unfortunately, everybody was caught. I was not physically caught. I'd been doing another army course on escaping from dogs by night. But they had the car numbers. I ended up in Chippenham prison. I was on police probation for 6 months. I was thrown out of the SAS, back to my own regiment, who were still retreating from the German border. Well, I put up with that for about another year, and then there was a notice asking for officers to apply for SAF. You may not remember, but back then world Marxism was doing very well. They just chucked the Brits out of the Yemen, and they were about to move into the Oman in order to block about 80% of the free world's oil coming out of the Gulf. So the socialist prime minister here agreed to send the Sultan of Oman a massive show of military strength, which he did. There were about 9 of us at that time. And I can remember applying. All the other officers were coming out looking unhappy because they had been turned down due to being too valuable to the regiment. But my application went through at once, and the Ministry of Defense think you cannot command Arabs in the dark being shot at by communists if you can't speak Arabic. So first of all, you get sent to the best place in the world for learning Arabic, according to the ministry, which is Beaconsfield in North London. I did fail the course, but I was still sent out. And on arrival, you meet your, shall we say, works team for the first time. And with due respect to the Oman, they were a piratical-looking bunch. There were 60 of them. Most, I discovered, were actually Baluchi, so they could only speak Urdu. Many of them were Zanzibaris, who spoke only Swahili. And the few that did speak Arabic had not been to Beaconsfield. So we ended with a major communications problem, but I went out there for 3 years, during which we lost 96% of the whole of Dhofar to the communists, which did not look good on a military CV, but I had to leave the army anyway because of the previous lack of A-levels. So the only thing, to answer your question as to how I got into expeditions, the only thing that I could do, I got married at the time, to make a living was basically to do what I'd been doing in the Cold War in Germany, which was teaching Scottish soldiers how to canoe and climb and ski and all that sort of thing, in order to stop them beating each other up in the NAFI, which they did because they were bored stiff because the Soviet army never bothered to attack. Now, that was called adventure training, and it was paid for by the taxpayer. And Ginny and I, my late wife, decided that we would do it without the taxpayer, and so the new word became sponsor, and was then, and now 38 years later, it is still sponsor. In those early days, we put together a team from 9 different countries. There are 52 of us in the team. A lot of them are still with us on the expeditions, like the current expedition we're doing. A lot of them are obviously dead, but the ones that aren't are still coming. The only thing which they've all got in common is none of us ever get paid anything at any time. No expenses, nothing. If you want a ship, you get it sponsored. If you want drawing pins to stick maps on the sponsored office wall, then you will get a drawing pin sponsor. No money can be spent at all on any expedition. The expeditions have strong scientific output. I won't go into the many expeditions that we've done or the records that we've broken. Most of the main polar records of this century have been through our group, and those that we didn't succeed, unfortunately, were, excuse me swearing, the Norwegians. When you do get to a pole or succeed, what you do when you get there is you make a lot of noise about it for the media, because that is what the sponsor wants. And also you stick your flag there before anybody else puts their flag in the same place, especially the French. And I would say, if we have been doing any good at doing it at all, it is probably due to the selection of the individual people on the team, and they are and were a wonderful lot. The flag on this expedition reflects the fact that most of the people on our team come from places like India, South Africa, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, 1 or 2 others as well, and finally got fed up with going under the UK flag, and therefore it was agreed that we would go under the flag which we all shared, which was the flag of the Commonwealth. And although nobody knows what it looks like, after this expedition they will, because we're writing the words of the Commonwealth under the symbol of the flag, which the office has agreed. Derek is making sure that happens. The Commonwealth have very kindly given us our headquarters office inside Marlborough House, which is wonderful, and that is where the volunteer staff who organize the entire exhibition will be. From there, they will do the biggest ever interactive educational website ever launched. Microsoft have paid £200,000 towards it, but it is actually the Department of Education. 42,000 state schools in the UK and a lot of other schools as well, over 200,000 schools in the Commonwealth. Sadly, there are some of the Commonwealth countries which don't have the receptive ability, but I think Derek is sorting that one out as well. Scientifically, we have a science committee run by the Vice President of the Royal Society, which is not very far from here. That is huge, and we have a scientific caboose with generators just to do the science for NASA and the European Space Agency, French universities, psychological stuff. A company called GSK are doing a whole new breed of top nutrition for athletes who won't then need steroids. All this will be going on during the expedition. And the charity, which we very much hope to interest some of you in, is not the one that we've been doing, which is called Marie Curie Cancer Care, for which we've raised 6.3 million in the last 4 years. Altogether, the expeditions have raised £16 million. We gave to the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital 3.5 million to start a new scanner laboratory for children in London with four-year-old children with cardiac disease. This is something increasing. I've had a massive heart attack. At my age, you expect it. Lots of you in this room might get one shortly, but you don't expect it for 4-year-olds. All the expeditions are based on a charity, and this one is called Seeing is Believing, and we aim to raise $10 million, and Standard Chartered Bank of Hong Kong will match that pound for pound, so $20 million will buy a lot of pairs of spectacles. It costs us £9 for a pair of spectacles. Unfortunately, in the UK, people seem to think that a child with short sight, their spectacles will fall from heaven, or the NHS, which they sort of do, and therefore people aren't very sympathetic to that. But in most countries, they don't fall from heaven. They are short-sighted, so they don't go to school, and not going to school can affect them later in life, and therefore £9 out of $20 million buys an awful lot of human beings somewhere, different lives. It's £21 at the moment for a cataract operation if you're over 40, quite more expensive if you're younger than that, and that's a lot of cataract operations. So that is what the charity side is. So apart from science, education, and charity, there is also the historic aim of the last great polar expedition, which is to cross the entire continent of Antarctica, which is much bigger than China and India stuffed together, but has no Tesco's en route. So it is a challenge. The average temperature will be -70 centigrade, going down to the lowest still air temperature out there recorded, which is -91 centigrade. And the Foreign Office will, I hope, over the next 19 days, give us a permit which no other Brit citizen has ever had for going down there in winter, because we've spent 3.5 years ticking the Foreign Office boxes of health and safety and everything else like that. So I hope you enjoy your dessert. And a very, very big thanks to the Commonwealth for making this expedition possible. And we will fly the flag very proudly.
Amen.